Let me be real with you for a second. I've been watching international football for a long time now. I've seen upsets, I've seen Cinderella stories, I've seen teams punch way above their weight and then quietly disappear back into obscurity the next tournament. But what Morocco did in Qatar, that wasn't just an upset. That wasn't a fluke. That was a statement, a loud, impossible to ignore statement that said, hey, the map of world football just changed forever, and you weren't ready for it. I remember exactly where I was watching that Spain penalty shootout. I'm not even Moroccan. I have no connection to that country whatsoever, and I was on my feet screaming when Hakimi walked up and just chipped it. Casual, ice cold, like he'd done it 1,000 times. In that moment, I think everyone watching, no matter who they were rooting for, felt something shift. Something about football changed that night. So with the 2026 World Cup literally weeks away, I wanted to take a real deep dive into this team. Not the highlight reel version, not the cheap hype video. I'm talking about who Morocco actually is, where they came from, what happened between Qatar and now, and honestly, do they have a real shot at going all the way this summer? Because I think people are sleeping on how serious this squad is, and by the end of this, I think you'll agree with me. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand why 2022 hit the way it did, you need to understand the history. You need to understand that Morocco wasn't some random team that stumbled into a semifinal. They've been building towards something like this for decades. Morocco joined FIFA back in 1956, just after gaining independence from French colonial rule. And they weren't wasting time either. By 1970, they were at the World Cup in Mexico, the only African team at that tournament. One team representing an entire continent. Think about that pressure for a second. And they showed up. Against West Germany, one of the most feared teams in the world at the time, Morocco held a lead in the first half. They ended up losing 2-1, but nobody was laughing anymore. Then they tied Bulgaria 1-1, and that draw, that single point, became the first World Cup point ever scored by an African nation. 1 point. It sounds small, but in context, it was everything. Then comes 1986. Mexico again. And this is where I think a lot of people who are only recently getting into Moroccan football really need to pay attention, because what happened here was genuinely remarkable. Morocco got dropped into a group with England, Poland, and Portugal. That's not a group, that's a gauntlet. These were legitimately good sides. England had Gary Lineker leading the attack, who was about to win the Golden Boot at that very tournament. Portugal had a squad full of real quality. And Morocco, who nobody gave a chance, went and did something nobody expected. They held Poland to a 0-0. They held England, Gary Lineker and all, to a 0-0. And then in the final group game against Portugal, something incredible happened. A player named Abderrazak Khairi scored 2 goals. Abdelkrim Meri added a third, 3-1. Morocco didn't just beat Portugal, they absolutely dismantled them. And in doing so, they became the first African nation, the first Arab nation, to win a World Cup group stage and advance to the knockout rounds as group champions. That's not a footnote, that's history. They eventually lost to West Germany in the round of 16, 88th minute, Lothar Matthaus free kick, heartbreaking stuff. But the message was clear. Morocco could compete with anyone. This wasn't a fluke. This was a team with real quality, real tactical intelligence, and a mentality that simply refused to be intimidated. The 1990s were a mixed bag. 1994 in the USA was rough, 3 losses in the group stage and they went home early. But 1998 in France, that's a wound that still hasn't fully healed for Moroccan supporters. Their best performance on the pitch in years. They beat Scotland 3-0, played beautiful football, did everything right, but they were eliminated on goal difference because Norway of all teams, beat Brazil in injury time with a penalty in the other group game, one result they had absolutely no control over, and it ended their tournament. Football is genuinely cruel sometimes. And then the real dark period started. After 1998, Morocco didn't make another World Cup until 2018. 20 years of qualifying heartbreaks, near misses, political turbulence within the federation, coaching changes, player controversies. 2 full decades where all that history, all that potential was just sitting there waiting, which brings us to Qatar 2022. And I need to give you the full picture here, because the story didn't start when the tournament kicked off. It started a few months earlier, in the chaos inside the Morocco camp. The coach at the time was Vahid Halilhodjic, a very experienced manager, but by that point someone who had completely lost the dressing room. Hakim Ziyech and Noussair Mazraoui, 2 of Morocco's best and most important players, had both been frozen out of the squad after falling out with him. The team was fractured, morale was low, and the World Cup was 3 months away. What the Moroccan Football Federation did next was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, depending on how you look at it. They fired Halilhodjic with 3 months to go and gave the job to Walid Regragui, a Moroccan coach who had done excellent work at club level but had never managed the national team. It was a massive gamble. And Regragui did something brilliant. He didn't come in with a tactical revolution or some radical new system. He came in and fixed the one thing that was broken, the unity. He brought Ziyech back. He brought Mazraoui back. He sat every single player down and reminded them what they were actually playing for. He talked to them about their parents, their grandparents, the people back home who worked multiple jobs just to watch the games on a small television screen. He gave the squad back its identity. By the time they got to Qatar, they were a completely different team mentally, and the football world was about to find out. Group stage opener against Croatia, the 2018 runners-up, led by Luka Modric, one of the best midfielders of his generation, 0-0. Tight, organized, Morocco looked extremely comfortable defensively. Okay, fine, people said. They got a draw. Let's see what happens next. Belgium. FIFA ranked them number 2 in the world going into that tournament. Their so-called golden generation, De Bruyne, Lukaku, Courtois, Hazard. The same group of players who'd been hyped up for a decade. Morocco beat them 2-0. Abdelhamid Sabiri with a free kick that left the wall and the keeper completely rooted to the spot, and then Zakaria Abouklal in the dying minutes finishing off a counter-attack with pure class. Belgium never recovered from that game and went home in the group stage. Canada in the final group game. 2-1 Morocco win, group champions. Just like 1986, they topped their group. Except this time, the competition was even stiffer, and nobody thought they could do it. Round of 16, Spain. The inventors of tiki-taka, European champions twice in the recent past, World Cup winners. And the game that followed was honestly one of the strangest and most tense things I've ever watched. Spain had the ball basically the entire game. Over 1,000 passes. They moved it side to side, probed, created little half chances, but Morocco's defensive structure was just impenetrable. Sofiane Amrabat was everywhere in midfield, breaking up play, recovering second balls, making tackles that shouldn't have been possible. Naïf Aguerd and Romain Saiss in central defense were absolute rocks. 120 minutes. 0-0. Penalties. And then Yassine Bounou just became an all-time legend. The way he saved those penalties, with that wide smile on his face, completely relaxed, almost like he was enjoying it. It was genuinely surreal. Spain didn't score a single penalty, not one. And when Hakimi stepped up last for Morocco, chip shot right down the middle, the keeper went the wrong way. It was over. Spain were out. Morocco were in the quarterfinals. The quarterfinal against Portugal will be talked about for generations. Cristiano Ronaldo, who hadn't started many games at that tournament, was watching from the bench in the first half. And in the 42nd minute, Youssef En-Nesyri rose above Ruben Diaz, who is one of the best defenders in the world, and headed the ball into the net. The jump they measured from En-Nesyri that day was almost 2 meters and 80 centimeters off the ground. The guy literally flew. That header stood as the only goal of the game. Portugal were eliminated. Ronaldo walked off the pitch in tears. Morocco were in the World Cup semifinals. The first African team, the first Arab team, ever. In the history of the World Cup. I get chills thinking about it even now. The players crying on the pitch. their mothers in the stands, the entire Arab world going absolutely insane. All those hours of work, all those years of near misses and heartbreaks, and here they were, 4 teams left in the entire world. The semifinal against France was always going to be a bridge too far, given the circumstances. Romain Saïs, their captain, came out injured after 20 minutes having played through significant pain. Aguerd had already been missing for a few games. They were playing France with basically half a defense. They lost 2-0, which honestly tells you nothing about how hard they fought. France had to work for everything they got, and the third-place game against Croatia, which Morocco also lost. But no one who watched Qatar 2022 remembers Morocco as the team that finished 4th. They remember them as the team that could have won it. Fast forward to now. We're sitting here at the end of May 2026, and the World Cup kicks off in under 2 weeks. And Morocco's situation is genuinely fascinating. A lot has happened between Qatar and now. Regragui stayed on as coach but struggled to match the high of 2022. The Africa Cup of Nations, which Morocco hosted this year, was a tournament that had all sorts of drama surrounding it. They reached the final against Senegal. Senegal actually won, but then the Confederation of African Football overturned the result because of Senegal's conduct, and Morocco were awarded the title. Make of that what you will, it was messy and complicated and not exactly the triumphant homecoming everyone wanted. Regragui and the Federation eventually parted ways in March just before the World Cup. Enter Mohamed Ouahbi. I want to be clear here. When I first heard this appointment, I was skeptical. Not because Ouahbi is a bad coach, but because the timing felt strange. You're changing the head coach of a semi-finalist team, someone who knows the players inside out, with 3 months to go before the biggest tournament on the planet? But then I started looking more closely at what Ouahbi actually did. This guy was the architect of Morocco's under-20 setup, and in 2025 he led the under-20 team to the World Cup title, beating Argentina 2-0 in the final. Those aren't flukes. That's a coach who understands how to build a team, how to organize them defensively, how to create attacking patterns, and crucially, he knows most of these young players personally. He developed them. That's not nothing. Ouahbi's approach is noticeably different from Regragui's. Where Regragui was masterful at organizing deep defensive blocks and hitting teams on the counter, Ouahbi is more aggressive. He wants to control games, press high, dominate possession in phases. For a Morocco team that now has significantly more technical quality than it did in 2022, that shift makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about the actual squad he's taken to this World Cup, because there are some big names missing and some exciting new additions that tell you a lot about the direction Ouahbi is taking this team. The most eye-catching absentee is Youssef En-Nesyri, the man who scored that incredible header against Portugal, left out completely. Ouahbi has gone in a different direction in attack, preferring more technical, mobile forwards who fit his pressing system better. It's a bold call, and I expect a lot of Moroccan fans will be nervous about it until the first goal goes in. Hakim Ziyech is also not in the squad. Genuinely one of the most creative players Morocco has ever produced. But at 33 with significant fitness concerns, Ouahbi has made the call to move on. Sofiane Boufal is another one who didn't make it, despite being recalled to the pre-tournament camp. The decision is hard to argue with if you're being objective. The squad needs legs and energy, and Ouahbi has prioritized that. The core of the team is still very much there from 2022 though. Yassine Bounou in goal, 35 years old now, playing in the Saudi Pro League with Al Hilal, but goalkeepers age differently than outfield players, and Bounou is still elite. His penalty-saving record for Morocco is borderline supernatural at this point. Achraf Hakimi is the captain. PSG right back, arguably the best attacking fullback in the world right now. He's 27, right in his prime, and as a side note, he's playing in the Champions League final with PSG on May 3rd 30th, 2 days from now. The man has had quite a spring. He'll join Morocco camp immediately after that. Noussair Mazraoui is back in the squad, as is Naif Agrd, who has stayed healthy this time around and looks sharp. Sofiane Amrabat anchors the midfield. You could make a very strong case that his performance against Spain in 2022 was one of the best individual displays by a midfielder in World Cup history, and he's only gotten better since. Now, at 29, this is probably his peak World Cup. In midfield and attack is where it gets really exciting. Brahim Diaz is the creative engine of this side. Real Madrid's gem, a guy who can play anywhere across the front line, who sees passes that most players don't even consider. His dribbling in tight spaces is exceptional, and he brings something Morocco were missing in 2022, the ability to unlock a parked bus. There were games in Qatar where Morocco's attack just couldn't find a way through teams sitting very deep, and Diaz is specifically the answer to that problem. Azzedine Ounahi is there from the 2022 squad. Remember the guy Luis Enrique couldn't stop talking about during the Spain game? The one who just kept running and running? He's a year older, a bit more experienced, and Ouahbi clearly trusts him. And then there's Ayoub Bouadi. This is the name I want you to remember going into this tournament. 18 years old, plays for Lille in France, switched his international allegiance to Morocco in May after FIFA approved the request. The kid has had a brilliant season in Ligue 1, and he's been described by people who follow French football closely as one of the most naturally gifted teenagers in European football. He's uncapped at senior level. Playing in a World Cup as your debut is a terrifying proposition for most players. Ouahbi clearly believes he can handle it. Ismail Saibari is another one to watch. PSV Eindhoven, intelligent player, excellent in tight spaces, the kind of midfielder who never seems rushed even when the game is frantic around him. This squad is different from 2022 in one very important way. There's genuine depth. In Qatar, when players got injured, you could feel the team thin out. This time, the bench is legitimately stacked. Ouahbi has built a squad where the first 11 and the next 7 or 8 are not that far apart in quality, which in a 48-team tournament where you might need to play 7 games to win the whole thing is absolutely crucial. Now let's talk about the actual tournament. Group C: Morocco, Brazil, Scotland, Haiti. Let me break this down honestly. Brazil is the one everyone's focused on, and rightfully so. Morocco versus Brazil on June 13th at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. This is the kind of game that will set the tone for both teams' entire tournament. Brazil are perennial favorites. They always have a squad full of technically gifted players, and they'll be desperate to make a statement after some underwhelming recent World Cup performances. But here's what I keep coming back to. Morocco beat Brazil in a friendly in 2023, 2-1. On paper that doesn't mean anything, friendlies rarely do. But it tells you something about the mentality of this Morocco side. They don't walk onto the pitch thinking they're the underdog anymore. They walk out expecting to compete. And Brazil, for all their talent, have struggled against organized, press-oriented sides in recent tournaments. If Morocco can stay compact in the first 30 minutes, weather whatever Brazil throws at them early, and then start imposing themselves, I think this game is genuinely 50-50. Hakimi overlapping on the right, Brahim Diaz cutting in from the left, Amrabat protecting the back line. It's a style that causes problems for anyone. Scotland on June 19th in Foxborough. Look, Scotland is a physically strong team that competes extremely hard, but technically they're not in Morocco's league. This is a game Morocco should win. The question is more about how they're feeling after the Brazil match. If they've played 3 hard games in the group stage, including a tough opener, will they have enough left in the tank against Scotland? Assuming Ouahbi rotates smartly, yes. Haiti on June 24th in Atlanta. Group stage finale, Morocco should have this well in hand. Ouahbi will probably use this game to manage fitness and get some of those fringe players some minutes. My prediction for the group: Morocco advances, probably in second place behind Brazil, or potentially first depending on how the Brazil game goes. Either way, they're through. Then comes the knockout rounds, and this is where things get genuinely interesting. Depending on how the bracket falls, Morocco could face the Netherlands, Japan, or other dangerous opponents in the round of 32. The Dutch are technically gifted, tactically sophisticated, and always a threat. But Morocco under Ouahbi has specifically been built to dismantle that type of team, press them high, win the ball in good areas, and use Diaz and Hakimi to punish them on transitions. Beyond that, the path gets harder. Potential quarterfinal opponents might include Germany or Spain, possible semifinal matchups against Argentina, France, or England. But I want to say this. If you'd told me before Qatar 2022 that Morocco would reach the semifinal and compete against everyone they faced, I would have said you were being very optimistic. And yet, they did it. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you Morocco can't go all the way, because the evidence of the last 4 years says I should keep my skepticism in check. That said, let me be fair about the challenges. The pressure on this team is enormous in a way that 2022 wasn't. In Qatar, they were the underdogs. Nobody expected them to go far. Now they're taken seriously. Every team will prepare specifically for them, and the psychological weight of expectations from Morocco, from Africa, from the Arab world, is a real thing. Handling that pressure while performing at the highest level consistently across 7 games is incredibly hard. The goalkeeping depth is also a concern. Bounou is elite, but he's 35, and one injury or suspension could be catastrophic because there's no proven replacement at his level. That's a vulnerability that smart opponents might try to exploit, and the En-Nesyri absence is going to be felt. If Morocco need a physical, hold-up striker to close out a game or win headers in their own box at the end of a tight match, they've lost that option. Ouahbi has gone all in on a more technical attacking approach, and if that doesn't work against a specific type of opponent, the alternatives are less proven. But when I look at the full picture, the squad depth, the tactical evolution under Ouahbi, the experience of the players who've already been to a World Cup semifinal, the hunger that comes from knowing you were this close, I think Morocco is absolutely capable of going deep in this tournament. Top 4, genuinely. A finals appearance wouldn't shock me one bit. There's also something to be said about timing. Hakimi at 27 is entering what should be the most complete years of his career. Brahim Diaz is 25, right at the age where technical players start to peak physically. Amrabat at 29 is the heartbeat of this team, and he's got one more World Cup in him at this level. The generation that almost did it in 2022 isn't the same hungry young team anymore. They're experienced, they know what the stage feels like, they know what it costs, and they know what they left on the table. That combination of youth, experience, tactical sophistication, and genuine belief is rare. Most teams have 1 or 2 of those things. Morocco right now has all of them. I've been doing this long enough to know that football doesn't care about narratives. The best story doesn't always win. The most deserving team doesn't always lift the trophy. There are injuries, refereeing decisions, moments of individual brilliance or madness that can change everything in a second. But if you asked me to pick a dark horse for this World Cup, a team that could genuinely surprise people and go further than most expect, I'd tell you Morocco every single time. Not because of sentiment, not because of the 2022 story, but because when I look at this squad objectively, I see a team built to compete at the highest level of the game. They open against Brazil on June 13th. Mark your calendars for that one. Because if Morocco can come out of that game with something, anything, I think the rest of the tournament is going to get very interesting very fast. The Atlas Lions are here, and this time they didn't come just to make the semifinals.